your head and you're still thinking through the covenant, I'm not an easy joiner either. So if you're still working through the covenant, that's okay with you. All right, so we're going to start, and this session is called Introduction to General Conference, and we have just about an hour. You know how the timekeepers are here. If you haven't met Jan, she's ferocious. She's ferocious. So don't get on her bad side. So we're going to move forward with the panel, but we want to do something really, a quick exercise first. So history and community do matter, right? So those who don't remember their history are doomed to repeat it. So in that spirit, I want to ask, is there anyone in the room any people in the room who've been to 8 general conferences or more? Would you stand up? 8 general conferences or more. Would you stand up? Are there any in the room who've been to, oh, thank you for that. Just a reminder, or raise your hand. Sorry, folks. So if you don't feel like standing up or you're unable to stand up, just wave your hand wildly. Anyone who's been to 7 general conferences or more, stand up or wave a hand. Any who've been to 6 or more, stand up or wave a hand. David Meredith, you should still be waving your hand. This is a trick. Any of you who've been to 5 or more, wave your hand or stand up. 4 or more, wave your hand or stand up. 3 or more, wave your hand or stand up. 2 or more, wave your hand or stand up. 1 or more, raise your hand or stand up. All right. Those who haven't been to any general conference, raise your hand or stand up. Bless you, child. Bless you, child. You're holding the sanity of the rest of us, so don't feel pressured. If you're a delegate or alternate delegate to general conference, will you stand up? Or wave. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bless you. We know that you're going into the center of a storm, and we are going to pray and support you as you make your way forward. History does matter. Community does matter. 50 years of struggle represented in this room. 50 years, and 50 years, and 50 years. That's a source of joy, and it is a source of lamentation. 50 years of struggle. I'm going to turn to, so all of the panelists on the stage with me are members of the Commission on the Way Forward. And in this critical moment, let me just say that we tried to recruit some of the women from the Way Forward to be on the panel as well. And either they're terribly popular or they had something else to do, because the women on the Commission on the Way Forward who would have showed up on this panel, let's be clear, not all of them would have, but some of them would have, weren't able to join us today. So we have a rare thing these days at Convo, a panel of all male-identified people. I'm going to take a risk and say that I know most of these folks well enough to know that. And apologies for that, but this is who we could recruit. Having said that, I'm going to start to my right and ask the panelists to introduce themselves very quickly.
Dave Knuckles, I'm a lay leader of the Minnesota Annual Conference, on the board of RMN, and treasurer of the connectional table of the church.
I'm Matt Berryman. I am currently executive director at Episcopal Charities and Community Services in Chicago, and a member of the Northern Illinois Annual Conference, and a member of the Commission on the Way Forward, and formerly among you all in the Reconciling movement. It's good to be here.
How were you among us before?
Oh, I don't know, just this little thing, you know.
Our former executive director, for those who don't know Matt.
I'm Brian Adkins. I'm an ordained elder in the California-Nevada Annual Conference. I was ordained as an openly gay United Methodist in 2016.
My name is Scott Johnson. I'm from the Upper New York Annual Conference, and I'm also a member of the Commission on the Way Forward.
Thank you all for being here. And I'm Randall Miller, and I'm a layperson from California and Nevada, also called God's country. though we struggle to live into that. So, okay, let's start with the first question to the panel then. So let's see, I know that many people in the room have followed what has happened, the twists and turns with the Commission on the Way Forward, every step of the way. But I'm wondering, Dave, if you wouldn't mind, just in a few sentences, and that'll be hard, just sort of tell us the important things we need to know about how the Commission on the Way Forward came into being, and anything else around its origins and where, how it came together.
Sure. So for those of you who haven't been and are new, just understand that the General Conference of the United Methodist Church is a global body of 864 people from all over the world, and our polity is somewhat modeled on the early ideas of the U.S. government, so it's the legislative branch. And we meet every 4 years for 2 weeks, which means we take 4 years of dysfunction that you see at the U.S. Congress, squeeze it into 2 weeks. Okay? And in 2016, we saw, I'd say, kind of the earliest buds on the tree that we planted with the biblical obedience movement, where we said we would be disobeying the rules, putting stress on the institution, sparking a reaction from the conservatives with threats of schism, which made it a very fraught place. 1,000 pieces of legislation were put before the body. Over 200 of them touched on sexuality and issues related to our issues. That's how obsessed the church has been. And the church was headed towards a more difficult place for us with some bad legislation moving forward when it became clear that this was driving the church, particularly the American church, to schism. And when that became clear, there was a request for the bishops to step in and create the commission, and all the bad things that were rolling our way were put on pause while the commission was created to do its work.
Now, I don't know all of you very well, but I do know that all of you are very busy people, and you're not looking for additional suffering necessarily in your lives. So I have a question for each of you. The way that I understand the commission came together, there was a nomination process. I'm going to guess that, you know, hundreds of people were nominated to serve on the commission, and out of those hundreds of people, 30 or so people were appointed or to be on the commission. And each of you said yes to your nomination or appointment. And I'm just wondering why. Why did you want to be a part of the Commission on the Way Forward? Are you in love with suffering? Are you, why did you agree, seriously, why did you agree on, why did you say yes to the Commission on the Way Forward? Why don't we start to my left this time?
You know, I don't want it to sound overly, you know, sanctified or anything, but I did feel one of those sort of God tugs about it. And I've learned that ignoring them in my life tends to lead to bad things. So I did go with that with a great deal of trepidation, quite frankly. But my hope was that it would not be the same old thing. And to be a part of what hopefully would be something that could lead to, if not was in effect, a full solution to the dilemma the church was facing. That was important. That was important to me.
Thank you. Brian?
My bishop called me, Bishop Brown called me, and asked if he could nominate me, and I responded with a list of everybody I could think of that would be better at it than me. And he said, well, I'm going to nominate you. And then he called again and said that he had seen a list. This is sometime later. He had seen a preliminary list of the commission, and there were no queer names on it, no queer people. And I said, well, I can't say no. I'm afraid that if I don't do it, they might not find anyone else, or some other queer person that might not be nominated. And I knew that Bishop Brown was going to fight for me to be on the commission, and I felt responsibility And Bishop Brown really, in the time that I knew him, grew as an ally. And I'm grateful that he trusted me and thought that I would be good for this. And I sometimes still wonder why I did it, why I've done it. But I have grown and learned a lot. Yeah.
And we're glad you said yes. Let's be clear. We're very glad you said yes. Matt, why did you want to join?
I don't know, wanting is a separate matter, but I did feel that, in a similar way to Brian, that some of the initial names that were being floated, it didn't look like there was going to be any queer representation. And so when that was one of my primary concerns was, in the absence of more than we actually had, to have something at least. And additionally, I think after the last General Conference, seemed clear to me at that point that the politics of inclusion had shifted in a way that had moved the movement forward in such a way that that my presence on there and a commitment to the institution one last time in the form of this commission might actually do some good. Now the rest of this panel will be devoted to whether or not that is the case or not, but those were the reasons. So.
Dave.
Well, I was happy to say yes to the commission because I've been in this work of reconciling since 2010 and have been in situations where we've been able to achieve some amount of peaceful reconciliation and moving forward. So I felt like I could add something to it. I'm the parent of a queer adult child and wanted to represent them, and happened to have come from a reconciling church in Minnesota that was one of the fastest growing churches. So to be able to tell the story of a fast growing reconciling church, I thought would be helpful in that context.
Great. All right, that's helpful to hear. And just for the record, aren't we glad that they put their names forward when they were in the process? Sometimes you're called to serve in unlikely places, and we're so grateful you said yes. So I've heard from some of you that the commission's process was different in many ways than the ways that the church often functions with task force. And so I just want to ask maybe just three of you, Matt and Brian and Scott. So what to you was unique about the commission's process in terms of the way you all deliberated and made decisions? What would you highlight from that? Or maybe, yeah.
I don't know. Let's see. What was unique about that process? It was a 9-session process. I think we spent something like 30 days together in total. And I will say, as an affirming word of the people who built the process, the moderators themselves did an excellent job of building a container where we could have discussion with one another and things could get done. So there was some expertise put into that. I will say that it was rigged from the beginning, as these things always are, in favor of those with privilege and power who were in the room, particularly around LGBT inclusion, because it was set up from the beginning, as it always is, and a failure to recognize how power actually functions in rooms. And whenever we would bring that up, there was sort of a glassy-eyed stare as if they didn't know what that means or looks like. And so that was one of the things we had to deal with, probably the most important thing that made it difficult. But everything else was very, very well done in terms of process.
We walked into the room the first day, and there was no way to know who was the safe person in the room, who thought I was an abomination, who might love me. And we had the time to really get to know each other and to build trust. We had a fantastic consultant, Gil Rendell, who really led us through relationship building. And he kept saying, we have so much work to do, we're going to have to work really slowly. And we learned to sort of live into that. And one of the things when we got to the end of the commission's last meeting, Gil said was, in the 18 months or 15 months, however, as long as we've been here, we have never once taken a vote. In all the commission's time, we never took a vote, but we remained in dialogue, remained in conversation, even and especially when things got hard. And I think that really made all the difference.
Scott.
To build on what I think, to not be redundant and try to build on what's been said, I did appreciate, and these aren't really unique aspects, but I did think that the relational piece was really important, that we were very deliberate about that because it did make space for us to be able to have some really difficult conversations when we needed to. I also think that there was an emphasis on what did bind us together, and I'm talking in terms of Jesus here, that it wasn't simply a matter of organizational process, but remembering that we are not just here for ourselves, but for someone and someone's and something bigger than ourselves, and that was key.
Wonderful. And so for those of you who haven't read about the commission, it had progressives, moderates, and conservatives all deliberately kind of mixed up. It had a lot of bishops, it seemed, editorial comment, a lot of bishops on the panel, 2 bishops leading the panel, and it had representation from throughout the United Methodist connection. So it really was quite a diverse group. So, all right, so I can hear the muttering in the back of the room that the hardcore political strategists want us to get into the substance of the report. So we're going to move there pretty quickly. And I'm going to ask 3 of you to do something really unfair, Dave, Scott, and Matt again. I'm going to ask you, Dave, to give us an elevator speech, meaning a very quick summary of the most important highlights of the One Church plan. I'm only giving him a minute because it could take 2 weeks to talk about it. Scott, I'm going to ask you to do the same with summarizing the impossible, complicated connectional church plan, but you only have a minute. And then, Matt, we're going to give you, because you mean so much to us, we're going to give you the heinous traditionalist plan to describe in a minute or not. Go, Dave.
Okay, well, the One Church plan really arose as a compromise effort to bring progressives to conservatives somehow to the middle. So it was kind of driven by centrist impulses, and what it provides for LGBTQ persons and progressive allies in the church would be the removal of the incompatibility language, end of prohibitions, end of trials, and an increase in public ministry of gay persons who are serving, in some cases closeted now, can serve openly, and in many annual conferences will be able to be ordained under this plan, marriage to happen anywhere a pastor is willing to do it. For conservatives in the church, it offers some assurance that their conscience will be protected. They will not be forced into ministry that they don't feel that they can provide. And local congregations will have some understanding that things won't be forced on them. They'll have a little bit of say. It has the least voting of any of the various plans, but it does give some assurances that way. And some of those assurances are reciprocal for our folks as well. And then I would say for the institutionalists on the commission, and that's actually a category I would describe as a dominant category on the commission. For institutionalists, it lets them move the controversy of a general conference off of center stage, avoid bad publicity, and as they see it, move on to other ministry. That's the nature of the One Church plan.
Cool. Scott?
To discuss the connectional conference plan, I would say that I think that what we see here is it takes a step further than the One Church plan in that you have to remember some of the core principles of the charge to the commission, which was as much unity as possible with as much contextual space as possible. I think what the connectional conference plan does is that it sets up structures that create and, for want of better language, codify this aspect. I think the simplest way for me to understand it is to think of a Venn diagram. And when you think of a Venn diagram, then what you see then is what happens, and sort of keep that picture in your head. So what we then do is that the 5 U.S. jurisdictions become 3 connectional conferences not based on geography. That there are connectional conferences that are essentially based on progressive values, one based on more centrist values, one based on more traditionalist values. Central conferences can choose to become their own connectional conference or choose to become part of one of those existing connectional conferences. What then happens is the existing jurisdictions would decide to align with a particular connectional conference. And if, as particular conversations happen or particular actions happen, if you find yourself in either after a jurisdictional decision, an annual conference decision, or a local church decision, that you are not in the particular conference that best represents your ideology, you have the opportunity to align with a different one. So that's what would that's how it would unfold. So let me make sure I've explained that well. So if a jurisdiction goes to one particular connectional conference, an annual conference, if it does not feel similarly, would have the option to decide to align otherwise. If an annual conference makes a decision, then a local church would have the option to align otherwise, okay? So that's where, and clergy also eventually have to make their position understood so that they can be appointed appropriately. General conference still exists. Its scope would shift in that it still has the same charge, but it would, in essence, have some of what General Conference does essentially is handed to the connectional conferences. And so General Conference would, while essentially its essential charge remains the same, it would not have, simply put, not have as much to do. Okay? That the Judicial Council continues. There is a reimagined Council of Bishops that what occurs is that they become more missional strategists and responsible for ecumenical relationships, and supervision shifts to the colleges in the connectional conferences. And I think in simplest terms, that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
I think in terms of implementation, the connectional conferences plan is by far the most complicated. I think the timeline was 10 to 12 years to implement it, and at last I heard, I mean, more than a dozen constitutional amendments would need to be passed to make it work.
Traditionalists.
This is super simple. It's almost like the Progressive Simple Plan. And in fact, the nefarious way in which it entered into the dialogue at the commission was such that I actually got a phone call and someone said, "Trigger warning, Matt Berryman, trigger warning." So I just say trigger warning for the basic reason that the conservative plan, this traditionalist plan, is nothing but what currently exists on steroids, mega steroids. And so it tightens accountability, it makes wiggle room a thing of the past for progressives, and it forces LGBTQ people and their allies really out of the church if you can't comply. So there's no need to go into details. If you want punishment, you can read for yourself. But it's indeed a brutal, brutal plan.
All right, and we should acknowledge that there are, so these are we're talking about the plans at this moment that sort of emerged, no, let's give benefit of the doubt, emerged out of the commission on the way forward in consultation with the Council of Bishops. But there are other plans, amendments, revisions that are starting to percolate out there as well. So know that these, one of the reasons why we're talking about these plans is we are certain that they will be on the agenda because they are in the commission's report, and they are the focus point of the called session on the General Conference. So we have one plan, if I've heard correctly, that supports pluralism and connection, eliminates most of the bad provisions in the discipline in terms of LGBT people, but also affirms that you can be supportive of LGBT people, or you cannot be supportive of LGBT people. And then we have an incredibly complex connectional conference plan that seems to reorganize the church into three more at least three theologically oriented conferences, does away with the jurisdictions, allows the central conferences to decide how many, up to 5 connectional conferences they want to create, and then gives each of those connectional conferences the power to make decisions about their polity, particularly around LGBT. But we share an umbrella. And then, as Matt said, the heinous traditionalist plan is just, to use a neutral term, ups the accountability and enforcement of the current prohibitive measures to the very max, and invites those who disagree with those to make a gracious exit from the church, which in church language apparently means gives you the boot in the butt. So those are the plans that we have before us. Now, you've all given kind of, except for Matt, gave a little more editorial comment, but that's all right. So you all have given the official party line. What would you want us to know? Now, thinking personally and about as your role as both commission members, but also as your role as allies or advocates, what do you think it's important for this gathering to know about any of the 3 plans? Let's say, what 2 important things do you want this gathering to hear as we continue our deliberations about the plans? Let's start here this time.
Of course. Well, what I would say is a couple of points. I would say first, I think the commission served its purpose. I think that one of the things for many of us is to, depending on no matter where our location is or no matter our perspectives on particular questions, that there were multiple ways to address a way forward. That I think that sometimes it had been reduced to perhaps only bandwidths we could see in our own minds, and to sort of stretch that wider, I think was important. Regardless of how you feel about the plans, I think that in that sense, I think that was important. I think the other piece is that all of these, I think that Randall captured a phrase that is a really good one for the moment, is that I don't know that anybody considers any of these plans perfect. And so the degrees to which conversations and work will have to continue is key. But I don't think anyone considers any of the options ideal. And lastly, one point that I cling to all the time is that no matter where you are, no matter where you stand, no matter what your positions may be, to never lose hope, because the one who promised is faithful.
Words that came up a lot when we were doing our work was, no matter what we do, some people are going to leave. And I kept reminding the commission that no matter what we do, some people are going to stay, because some of us feel a prophetic call to be here. And I think that's particularly true of the traditionalist plan. If the traditionalist plan were to pass, I think, and I said GCFA would spend all its time in copyright infringement lawsuits, because when you tell somebody you can't call yourself United Methodist, you can't have the cross and flame on your sign anymore, I think it would be more defiance than they've ever seen, probably. And secondly, I would say that I am a pastor. I'm called to be a pastor that it's the joy of my life. And while I was on this commission, 2 people in my own family, 2 queer teenagers in my own family attempted suicide. And it was very real. And I will say that commission members supported me. during that time. But what I tried to bring back to the commission time and again was, I hear a lot of talk about mission, the mission of the church. And if you want to move forward the mission of the church, then open the doors to the 10 to 15% that have been locked outside for so long. Make room for people. And I know the one church plan is not perfect, but I think it moves us forward. It's my hope.
Thank you, Brian. I've presented on this whole thing many times to many different people in the last year, and there's always a point where I explain who's on the commission, and then I point out the 3 queer persons on the commission, so Alice Williams, who's not here, and every day was hard for those folks. It's not fair that there were only 3. It's not fair that it was so hard on them, but every meeting, the 3 of you guys, Alice included, came and contributed and stuck with it. And I think every day they were exhausted at the end of the day more than anybody else, but we all owe them a great debt of gratitude. And apparently a standing ovation. I really wish I had said that last, because I would have pretended that was for me. But the things that I wanted to say about the plans and answers to Randall's question would be, first of all, on the traditionalist plan, while Matt's points were spot on, it's actually not a simple plan. It is as long and complex as the connectional conference model. And in addition to very explicitly trying to push queer people out the front door of the church, it actually opens the back door wide open for conservative conferences or churches to go leave anyway. So they have the opportunity to put the house on fire and walk out the back, and we need to understand that too. What I want you to know about the politics of General Conference is that 60% of the delegates live in places where same-sex marriage is legal and where there are a range of other protections, the United States and Western Europe. We have 60% of the vote. 40% of the delegates come from places where same-sex marriage is not legal, where being a homosexual, being anywhere on the LGBTQ spectrum might be in various ways illegal or socially very, very oppressed. So these folks come from tough contexts. And I think as those delegates look at General Conference, and we need probably a quarter to a third of those delegates willing to vote for something in order to make progress, they will see a choice. Their opportunity is to see the one church model as a choice that is a vote for unity of the global church, avoiding schism, or they can see the traditional plan as a choice that's really all about sexuality. So we need to be smart about how we approach the delegates and realize it's not a question of this or that. It's, are you voting for unity or are you voting about sex? And that should shape some of our thinking in terms of how we move forward. So that's what I would say about general church politics. And this isn't about the plan, but I just want to say this one last thing. General church is just one aspect. Improving the book of discipline is just one thing. This moment that we have created through our biblical obedience, this crisis that the church is going through now, creates the opportunity for us to have unprecedented access to churches in the United Methodist denomination to do hearts and minds change, grassroots organizing change. So we need to seize this. Amen.
We're talking about in places like Africa where we have not been doing it for 30 years.
And doors that have been closed to us. So I just hope we can make the most of that moment, not just leading up to General Conference, but after. Because it's not just about the rules, it's about hearts and minds.
I think that perhaps the thing that I would want you to know most about the commission, and I think this is a sort of broader reality for the whole church in this question in general, which a lot of us are familiar with, but I just want to reiterate it, is that the one church plan which ended up being the production of the commission in earnest, is about as good as we could get, with unity being the #1 goal, and that being the central concern. And with a commission that's filled mostly with institutional people who are concerned not about LGBT people, but about the church as an institution. And so I want you to know that my colleagues here and the other progressives on the commission did a beautiful job of being true to themselves, but the setup of the institution and the commission itself, you know, there's a quote, I can't remember who, that the method produces the result. And when you have a method that's flawed from the outset and rigged, it can only get you so far. And so know that our hands were tied in many ways as progressives, the amount of impact we could actually have. That's not an excuse or anything. It just is a kind of statement about process.
Right. All right, so we actually have about 12 minutes, I'm told, for questions and answers. So I wanted to see if there were any folks out there. So, and I'm terrible at tracking. So could we get someone to come forward to be our, well, David, I was trying to not say Vanna White. That was a, all right, so I saw Rick's hand go up first. And we want to get we're going to get a diverse group of people from viewing, so just know.
To all, peace and grace. I'm Rick Husky. I was with one of the founders of Affirmation. The question I have about the central, 40-some years, I remember. The question about this central issue is, what happens to seminaries in the connectional process?
So in which of the 3 plans? In the One Church Connectional Conference, or which one of the?
The one where you...
okay, connectional.
I don't believe that seminaries change. I think that if you're talking in terms of, well, that's my understanding. As I read it, and so I think that some questions are not yet answered, and so, but that would be my understanding. I don't pretend to own that to that degree, though.
I think that the Connectional Conferences plan is also designed in such a way that each Connectional Conference would not have to relate to all the general boards and agencies in the same way, and we know that there would be Connectional Conferences that did not want to relate to G-Corps and COSRO, and I think that's part of the strategy.
And so just quickly, the seminaries these days are kind of independent, almost independent bodies, because they don't get a lot of funds from the United Methodist Church as they did, say, 30 years ago. So it appears in the plan that that there would be a plan for sharing some of the general administrative tasks of the church, including the pension plan. The program agencies would be subject to revision, and to representatives from each of the connectional conferences would come together and agree about whether they would share and, more importantly, fund the program agencies of the church. And so that's how it would develop. And I could go on, but I won't. All right, other questions? Let's see, I saw a hand over here. I'm sorry, I don't know everyone's names. Deb Scott, you're next, not just because you were my youth counselor.
Evelyn Glass, North Texas Conference. My comment has to do with the One Church plan and what it brings to mind for me after the passing of the 14th Amendment and the starting of Jim Crow. I know that any plan is going to take time, and there will be opportunities to revise it along the way. But I just cannot help but think about what happened after slavery. I mean, it could not have been passed fast enough for Jim Crow laws to be put into place that went for 100 years. So even the best plan is scary to me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thanks.
Deb.
Deb.
One of my youth counselors, everybody.
Debbie Scott, serving at Lovely Lane in Baltimore, the Mother Church of Methodism. So my question, especially after seeing the T-shirt outside with John Wesley saying, "Dude, where's my church?" For each of you who presented on each of the plans, what would Wesley say about that particular plan?
Reach back. Reach back. What do you think Wesley would say? Let's start there. So let's not.
Your heart is not like mine. I will not take your hand.
Anyone else want to take a guess? All right, we're gonna cogitate about that, and Deb, we're gonna get back to you on that one.
So I want to make an invitation that we have the Easter conference at Lovely Lane, the resurrected church that Wesley would have hoped for.
All right, on the other side. Okay, there's someone all the way in the back there. I'm trying to move across the room if that's not obvious to people. So, but if you have something urgent that you have to say, wave your hand more vividly.
Roger Ballard from Battle Creek, Michigan, Christ United Methodist Church. My question is, and I had a statement first, you are asking about the seminaries, and our pastor that just left on July 1st was from Asbury, but he was a dysfunctional Asbury. He was very conservative, yes. He was not.
Okay, that's the dysfunction. That's
yes, exactly, and very proud of him. We were his first church. Out of the three plans, the one plan, I take it gives the best to the local church to be able to decide what direction they want to go. That's what I wanted to understand.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is complicated. So all three of those plans ultimately boil down to a local church decision. They all do. It's just that the level of voting that's required and the level of conflict to get to that point is greater in some plans. So the one church plan is the least amount of voting, and it's more kind of up to our leaders to decide. So our clergy sessions figure out ordination, and our pastors figure out marriage. The local church has a role to play in terms of will their building be used, but they have no say over what their pastor chooses to do as far as who to marry or not. So sometimes it's described as, that seems congregational, but that's really because the other plans categorize you, but you have to choose to be in that category.
Just to quickly amplify, so in the one church plan, it's the local church is deciding whether or not, for example, to accept an openly LGBT pastor and or allow same-sex weddings to happen. So that's really, in the connectional conference plan, the decision really is about affiliation. So if you're open to LGBT stuff, you choose the connectional conference that reflects that theological and social commitment. And then the traditionalist plan is really about whether to stay in or get out. Those are the choices. So just to gloss over that.
Well, for the local church, I want to be more nuanced because literally what it says is a local church needs to vote to say yes before a wedding will happen in the building. But there is no local church vote on who the pastor may be. There is no, you get to say, I'll never take a gay pastor. There is a consultative process that we have in the church, and it relies on that for some dialogue back and forth. But it's the plan that avoids local church people saying, I want to vote and say I'd never have a X, Y, and Z, whereas the other plans require that.
All right, there was someone who was raising her hand urgently right there in the middle. No, I'm talking about you. There.
I'm right here.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Billy Watts from Rio, Texas Conference, an elder at a Reconciling Church in San Antonio. I'm going to tag off of what, is it Debbie, said here as to what Wesley would say, and a thought that kept running through my mind as you presented the plans. I have a feeling of very much dissatisfaction with all of them. And so my question is, what would Jesus say?
Big question.
Let's see, David, there's someone right there in the back. I know I'm moving this way.
Come to this side yet.
Yeah.
So.
And then we have 4 minutes to get to this side. So are there 2 people over here while we're preparing? There's one in the back. Oh, just one. All right, even more beautiful. Okay.
Tina Marie Todd from Tucson, Arizona, First United Methodist Church. You asked for questions and comments, and one of the things that I have not heard is that they are not only going to be, the conservatives are not only going to want to discriminate against gays, but now they want to extend it to transgender, genderqueer, and other odd identifying people, and that this expansion of the base that they want to discriminate against really needs to be spoken to with greater urgency and greater strength, because it's something that was never thought of in the past.
Mm-hmm. For example, so just to make clear that the traditionalist plan would kind of formally extend the prohibitions to the whole spectrum of sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, in practicality, transgender folks have been discriminated against and brought up on charges in the church before, so this would just codify that. So, okay, there was one person over here, and then we're going to come back to Amy. Who was the one over there?
I'm Kathleen Wilder, and I am a pastor of a 2-point charge in downtown St. Louis, Lafayette Park United Methodist. That's been a reconciling congregation for 20 years, and Centenary, that's been a reconciling congregation for 25 years. My question is, how do I prepare the people I serve so they aren't hurt again? That they don't have false expectations that justice will be revealed, that they aren't hurt, because every general conference, about 20% of them give up and walk away, and I don't want to be part of that hurt, and I want to help them be prepared, and I need wisdoms on how to do that.
I've heard people say, who are we going to be after that special general conference? Who are we going to be when this commission work is done? The thing I say to my congregation, who many of them say, well, we need to be done with this. They've been reconciling for forever. What I say to them is, this is your church right here. We're your church. And you know, we continue to show up because we love each other, and we need to show that. We're responding to the gospel. Week after week, we come back. There's no promise that we're not going to be wounded in this process, but some things are worth fighting for. And as a pastor, my heart goes out to those who continue to be hurt by this process. I am hurt by this process, but our hope is in the risen Christ. He didn't just die, he got up again. That's the truth.
Last question, comment, Amy with the mic.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, okay. One more.
I'm Amy DeLong from Love Prevails and from a reconciling congregation in Wisconsin. I'm so appreciative of what Matt said about the system being flawed, that the whole process is flawed, that the voices needed to be at the table were not at the table. And it feels like a support of the one church model is the result of a flawed system. And to support it, I think, offers our tacit approval of the flawed system. And I think we need to resist the one church model and resist and put our energy into trying to bring an end to systems that continue to operate without our input.
Thank you for that. One last person.
Thanks so much. My name is Lee Johnson. I'm a pastor at Asbury United Methodist Church in Prairie Village, Kansas, and we are also a reconciling congregation. And we put together at Asbury during the last month we have our last Way Forward Bible study this Monday night. You're all welcome to come. starts at 6:30 in the parlor, but I am co-leading this with a doctor, retired endocrinologist from KU Medical Center. And much of what we're doing looks at scientific investigation. In other words, reason. And what scientific investigation says about who we are and why we are who we are. And 24 out of 50 states this last year considered legislation to move past the word I'm trying to say, and it's escaping my mind, therapy, conversion therapy, to outlaw conversion therapy because of what scientific investigation says. I'm just curious what kind of input the way forward folks, what you all received on scientific investigation, the latest news, what it says about why we are who we are genetically and how we've become who we are in that way.
Anyone want to respond? Brian?
We didn't look at science. I will say we did receive statistics about from the Pew Institute on the changing attitudes toward sexuality and gender identity, toward gay marriage, and we looked at those in depth. And I'll say that when it comes to conversion therapy, ex-gay therapy, that was brought up in the beginning. Some of the conservatives in the beginning said, we need to hear from experts in ex-gay therapy and those who have come out of a gay lifestyle. And I said, well, I'm not going to sit here and listen to that. That is bullshit. It's not just bullshit. It's offensive. And I want to say just quickly that one of my favorite people on the commission, and everybody has ever talked to me knows this, was Pat Miller, the director of the Confessing Movement. And we were in an Uber one time to the airport, and she turned to me and said, you know, Brian, in this process, I'm surprised that you don't get mad and you don't leave the room when we go into these conversations. And I said, I do. Matt and I both do. We cry in the room. We get up and walk out. You know, you think we're going to the bathroom. We're going to take a long walk. And she said, but you come back and you talk to us. And I said, well, I think the reason is that, you know, I grew up Apostolic Holiness Pentecostal. And I grew up with everybody in my life was a conservative, and theologically and politically. And I told her, I said, everybody I've ever loved in my life was a conservative. And for better or worse, I've never learned how to unlove people that I love. And you know, in this process, we learn to love each other. And I can say we did that authentically. And I love Pat Miller. And I said, I've learned to get away from people who are hurting me. I've ended relationships that are harmful, but I've not learned how to unlove people. And I think that's an important point, and I think it speaks to what Reverend David said today. But at the end of that conversation, we're just sitting there, it got quiet in the car for a few minutes, and then out of nowhere, she just turned to me and said, you know, I don't think we ought to be sending people to ex-gay therapy.
All right.
And I said, my God, if there was an aisle in here, I'd be running it. We're going to shout. Pull this Uber over.
Thank you, Brian. And would you join me in thanking all of these fine people? Thank you for being courageous enough to stand for us and to stand for God's kingdom. And with that, we hand it back over to the fabulous MCs for the event, Helen Ride, and even more fabulously, because he says so.
So please hang tight, because we have some important announcements, and we don't get back together again until 7:15 this evening. So there are some critical things that you need to know. So hold on a second. First, is Erlene Joy Reedy here because I have your wallet? Early. Okay, it's right here.
I went to school for this too.
I need to get myself to seminary. There are so many things I don't know how to do.
That's why I lost it, so you could bring it to me. That was
Really? Your strategy worked. That's really true. All right, let me just say this. Please, could you make sure you're wearing your badges? Okay, it's really, really important from a security point of view. If you haven't picked up your badge yet, the registration is still available in the office, which is sort of out there and to the left. So make sure you go up and pick up your badge, and please be wearing your badge.
Newsletters are available at the hospitality table. So if you're thinking, there are things I'm not informed about, where do I get this information? You can get it in a newsletter available at the hospitality table. From 12:30 until 2 p.m. during lunch, we will have our workshops. They can be found in your table runner. Wait.
No,
not the
book signing.
Oh. Sorry, y'all.
They didn't have that in seminary.
They did.
Reading the card. I love you. Woo!
Girl.
I'm in trouble now.
Lucky I don't have my Bible now. I can read that. So we're having a book signing in the foyer. Austin Hartke, who has written this incredible book about trans experience and the Bible, is out there. He's a celebrity in my heart. And Susan DeWitt Hall is also out there with her book, and they're great people, so go out there and support. The book signing will take place from 12:30 to 2 p.m., correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have delayed lunch until 12:30. It is right now, it is about 5 to 12. So the breakout sessions that are happening are still happening. They're going to be condensed to about 35 minutes, and lunch will be at 12:30. The breakout session information is on the table runner, which, as Jarrell previously indicated, is available on the hospitality table if you haven't got one. Yes. Yes, one of the workshops, so the breakouts, there's two things. Oh.
Got to do the arm.
That you get it for seminary.
You have to stretch. You have to.
These are the discussion groups and where they're going to be located, and they will go till 12:30. At 12:30 we have lunch. At 2 o'clock we have workshops, and workshops information is in your booklet. One of the workshops is continued conversations with the members of the Commission on the Way Forward for here. So if you have more comments, questions, want more discussion, there is a workshop for that. One of our workshops, unfortunately, has been cancelled. Grace Imathu has not been able to make it with us. So unfortunately, Grace's workshop will not be happening. And finally, Jim Quinn, are you here with your camera? Jim is taking photos on behalf of the coalition, and Jim will be in some workshops taking photos. So this is not a press person taking photos. The press are not allowed in the workshops, but Jim is taking photos on behalf of the coalition and will be taking photos. And
before Jan goes, while they're doing that, there are several individuals who are in possession of key cards to the transgender safe space room in room 412. Some have agreed to be visibly identified for you to find throughout the convocation. If you are one of those people or persons, wave your hands. Everyone memorize the face that you see waving their hand. This is the person that you talk to, or the people. I can't see everybody. So yeah, if you would like access to that room, feel free to talk to these awesome people.
And one more thing. In addition to the breakout sessions now, those delegates that are here, General Conference delegates who are with us, they are meeting separately in the Soulard room, S-O-U-L-A-R-D. To get to the Soulard room, you go out of here as if you're headed to the bar. Right before you get to the bar, you take a right and go through the double doors, and the Soulard room is right there. So if you're a delegate, your breakout session is in that room. We will see you at 7:15 for gathering music this evening, which is going to be with the Black Tulip Chorale. So 7:15 back here. Enjoy the breakout sessions and the workshops, and we'll see you later.
Can we pray before we dismiss, since this is the last time we'll be together?
That's why you went to seminary.
Everyone's still mumbling. Yes, there's a Christian here who wants prayer. Amen. Pray with me, y'all. God, we give you thanks for this time of fellowship. We give you thanks for all of the things that we have learned, for all of the people in this room, the people that were not able to make it. May your Spirit continue to be with us this weekend. Bless the food that we will eat. Bless the hands that prepared it. And bless this time. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.